Abracadabra.
Welcome to the Abracadamn podcast, and I'm your host, stand-up comedy magician, Danny Whitson. Guys, I'm excited about this. This is our very first episode. I've been wanting to do a podcast for a long time, but I wanted to do it the right way, the way I wanted to do it. I wanted to make sure it was fun with interesting guests. And I'm excited with our very first guest on our very first episode. He's a local news anchor legend. So if you've grew up anywhere in the Knoxville, Tennessee area, you know who this guy is. If you're a millennial, a Gen Xer, a baby boomer, you know who this guy is. We spent many nights and mornings watching this guy on our television sets. I had the opportunity to talk to him about topics like tough stories, bloopers, and the dreaded term fake news. So if you guys don't mind, sit back and relax and enjoy our very own Ron Burgundy, Mr. Gene Paterson. All right, Gene Paterson, thank you for being here. If you don't mind, would you mind starting us off with a little background and letting the listeners know who you are?
Sure. Gene Paterson, currently working in community relations over at Consolidated Nuclear Security at Y12. But prior to that, I spent 30 plus years with a brief 3-year hiatus in broadcast. I was at WATE's primary anchor there for 14 years. And then prior to that, I served 3 years as Mayor Victor Ash's deputy with the city of Knoxville. And prior to that, I was 18 years at WBIR. So most of my time has been in the broadcast business and news in particular. I'm a UT graduate. I'm from down in Monroe County, Madisonville. Go Golden Tornadoes. But of course, you know, Danny, I'm old enough. My high school doesn't exist anymore. Sequoia High School is the merged school system school that resulted from Madisonville and Vaughn, Oregon together. So MHS is just a fond memory for many of us. But so that's who I am. Married with a wife, 2 stepdaughters, 3 grandkids, and you know, happily ensconced in Oak Ridge and doing things there to help out the community.
That's awesome. Well, you know, like, you know, I think there's 3 different generations that I think remember you locally, because you are, whether you know it or not, you're a local media legend. So, you know, anyone can see Gene Paterson, like, I know that guy. I remember that guy. And I think you identify with millennials, Gen X, and baby boomers. You know, I was looking at some old YouTube clips, and I remember this. I remember being a little kid and watching the Bowl Brothers.
Right.
And this was back whenever Tennessee went to bowl games. So this was great.
Well, you know, it's funny. That was back in the mid '80s. I was at WBIR, and the promotions director there was a fellow by the name of Steve Dean. And Steve came up with this idea. Tennessee wound up going to the Sugar Bowl for the first time in decades. That was in 1980. Well, I think it was the '86 Sugar Bowl, because it was on New Year's Day, but it was for the '85 season. So he was trying to figure out a way to promote our coverage because. You know, BIR back in those days, well, we were an NBC station, and I think ABC carried the game. So we were trying to figure out a way to try to promote our coverage as opposed to the ABC affiliate in town. So he came up with the Bowl Brothers, which is a takeoff on the Blues Brothers. And it was just the only reason I got to go is I wasn't in sports, but I got to do features. And that may have been that. Well, it was a 5-year stretch for me being a Bowl Brother. So every year that Tennessee would go to a bowl game, we would send the Bowl Brothers to wherever we went to New Orleans. We were in Miami. I mean, we went to all kinds of great places. And it probably was one of the more fun assignments that I had in my time in television. And it's funny, Danny, you should bring it up, because oftentimes it is one of those things that people of a certain age will say, hey, I remember I was, in high school or I was a young adult when you guys were the Bowl Brothers, and we had fish named after us. But it was and it was a really top notch promotion. In fact, that year we won several Addies for that promotion.
Now,
So
Addie,
Steve knew
is
what he
that
was
like
talking.
an Addie?
It's
Is
sort
that
of like
like
yeah, it's sort of like winning an Oscar in the movies
okay?
for advertising. The Addy is sort of we were actually best of show, I think, the year that we entered that first year. So it was fun. It was fun, and it was I think viewers enjoyed it. You go back and look at some of that stuff, and it really was pretty stupid.
Well, you guys had some dance moves. I mean,
Well,
tell me, I was like,
I,
wow, Gene
like I
can
say,
move.
well, I was about 50 pounds lighter then too. But yeah, you'd like to think that you could get away with that kind of humor and fun times in today's local markets. I don't know. It was probably the most unusual thing that anybody had done in a long time in Knoxville TV. So it really took off, and we had a blast with
That is interesting because you don't see nothing like that
it.
these days.
No. Yeah, and part of it is the structure of businesses now, and local news was local news. I mean, if you look at the newspapers now, they're all corporately owned and coming out of a hub somewhere other than Knoxville. A lot of the decisions I think made for local TV stations aren't made in the newsrooms of those TV stations. A lot of it's corporate driven. My time at WAT, my time at BIR, we had I like to think we had a pretty good feel for what the community wanted and needed in terms of news, and I thought we delivered it. But there were times when we were superseded by corporate interests. So that's always going to happen. But unfortunately, I think it's probably happening more now than it ever has.
The how difficult is it for someone to get into being a news anchor
Oh,
into the news?
yeah, that's a great question. It's one of those you can't get in the business without experience, but you can't get experience unless you're in the business. I was very lucky to get in through some internships. My degrees from UT in broadcast management. My goal was never to be on TV; it was to be in the sales department or in the general manager's office. But I had a friend of mine who had graduated and was a reporter at Channel 10, and she suggested I do an internship in the newsroom. And when a pretty young woman asks you to come hang out with her in the newsroom, what are you going to do? I went hung out, right? Well, I found it so fascinating, uh, and I enjoyed my time. And the assignment manager I guess, liked whatever it was I was doing, and they offered me a part-time job. And Danny, here's where everything in life is about timing, and you have to be prepared for when the right moment happens. So. At the time at BIR, they had part-time weekend student reporter, somebody out at UT, and it just so happened that after the first quarter that I did an internship there, and I did a couple of them. They called them practicums down there, and I think they still do. Um, but this reporter was graduating, and so when she left, that left an opening, and the assignment manager looked at me and said, "Hey, would you be interested in that part-time job?" And I thought, wow, yeah, sure. And so I was not qualified. I was very bad at editing. I'd done some reporting back in my youth. Well, my youth, I was young then too, but back in my college days and high school days, I was the editor of the local high school newspaper, and I did some radio work in Madisonville and some newspaper work. So I had some reporting background, but it was a struggle. But because of that part-time job and the fact that you could get away with making a lot of mistakes, I developed into a decent reporter, and they offered me a full-time job. So had it not been for this girl's decision, well, her graduating from UT and going on to do something else, I would not have had that door open for me for that part-time job, which led to a full-time career. So there you have it.
That's interesting, and I'm a firm believer too. When opportunity comes a knock, and you have to, it's go for it.
Well, it's funny because at the time I was working full time for Ruby Tuesday Restaurants, going to school full time, working full time. I was at the original store there on Cumberland Avenue, and so I had to work with my employer to arrange my schedule so that I was working Monday through Friday nights, so that I'd have my weekends available, so I could do that part-time job.
Wow.
Yeah. So for about 6 months, it was all my time was filled. And that was back in the days when Ruby's had 14 restaurants in their entire chain, and the founder Sandy Bell had urged me to stick around and grow with the company, but I decided to put my foot in TV news. And I've always wondered, if I'd stayed in restaurants, I might be hanging out on a Caribbean island now, because they did pretty well. They did really well.
We could eat at Gene's. You never know. It maybe Gene's.
Yeah, or I could have just spent 20 years, 30 years there.
But that still would had to been kind of interesting to, you worked there, and all of a sudden, like, there's Gene on the television, so.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because of course, there on the Strip, we had for early happy hour. I remember we had these professors who would come in and hang out, before they would head home after their classes, and they always got a kick out of the fact that they could, have a happy hour drink with Gene, Monday through Friday, and then catch him on the weekend news after that. But so anyway, the original question was, how do you get into the business, or what advice would I give? So the advice I would give people, I think it's tough for folks. It's particularly difficult for young people who want to come in and they want to be an anchor. I think that's a crazy thing to be, because I think you need to come in and get comfortable in your skin and be a reporter, learn how to report, learn the tools of the business. And then as you develop your on-camera abilities, as a reporter in the field, I think it becomes pretty obvious whether if you can handle anchoring or not. But if your goal is to anchor, and that's where all the money really is in broadcasting, then you really need to think about honing your reporting skills, because I think good reporters make better anchors, is my opinion.
That's well, I mean, it makes sense. The reporting, that seems like that's the tough job. It seems like when you see them standing out in the snow, or
yeah.
Well, that's like paying your dues, I'm assuming, right?
Well, and that's exactly right. Now, there are some people who are very, very good and talented, and they come right out of college, or right out of wherever they're coming from, and they head straight to the anchor desk, and they're smooth as silk. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, some people are just telegenic and have great voices and just have sort of a comfort level on camera. But I think to be a really good anchor, you have to know what questions to ask. When you listen to a politician say something, you really need to understand what they're talking about, the processes of government, and politics, and all those other things. And I don't think you get that just from the anchor desk. In fact, anchors tend to be sort of isolated. I spent 14 years as a primary anchor. We tried to get out in the field as much as possible, but a lot of the news that we were delivering was given to us. It's handed to us by a producer or by a reporter. So you sort of lose that sort of element of being in the field. But we tried to get out as much as we could.
And this isn't something I actually even thought of until this past week, when I was, thinking about, you coming on the podcast. But as a news reporter, a news anchor, it has to be a very difficult job when it comes to things, hearing stories that people don't want to hear. Like how a police officer has to see things that most people don't want to see.
That's right.
News anchors and reporters have to deal with the same thing. Are there any things? I mean, has that become an issue with news anchors and reporters?
Well, obviously over the years I've covered all kinds of stories, natural disasters to crime to murders to rapes to fires to all
you
kinds
hear it
of
all.
tragedy and all kinds of I've been blessed in the fact that I've had an opportunity to view and report on many kinds of things. But those human tragedies, those are the difficult ones. Some of the toughest reporting that I did in the field was toward the end of my career with the Christian Newsom murder trials. Those were two kids who had been raped. They'd both been raped, brutally murdered. And then there were four suspects, and I sat through all their trials and then their retrials, and that was tough. You know, when you sit there and the first time you see the autopsy photos of these poor kids who were, you know, they were just at the beginning of their lives and were snuffed out, and you can't help but feel, you know, just deep sadness about that. I can remember that first day that we saw those photos when the coroner was test. You know, I came home and literally sat uh, and wept. You know, I wept because you know, we're all human. You know, but at the same token, you try to maintain some sense of objectivity, and you report that story because they had been convicted at that point. But man, that was tough. Those are the kinds of things that I think if you don't feel some sense of humanity there, then you know then you're
is that something they teach in school, like journalism school? Do they teach those kind of
yeah, you
things?
know, back in my day, they did, and I think that's something that you gain with experience. You know, it is tough. Even young reporters, when there's been some sort of tragedy, you're, you know, we're always telling people, you know, stay away from being outdoors, or you know, there's a tornado coming, take shelter, or there's a hurricane going, you know, coming into the gut. What, you know, the reporters are always the ones who are heading that way, right? Tornadoes over here in the north, we're headed north, and so yeah, they don't train you in those kinds of. At least they didn't when I was around. But it's just something you have to gain through experience, and hope you have people who mentor you when you're a young reporter to help them along. Because I've seen reporters and photographers who've been in the middle of some of those kinds of stories, and they decide that's not for them. I mean, we had this one guy who was a studio cameraman for a number of years and wanted to be a field reporter or field photographer. So he got his opportunity, and he wound up going to a couple of car accidents or some really grisly crime scenes. And he said, "Man, this is not for me. I don't want to do that." So he left the news business pretty quickly.
I don't think I can do it. Well, let's okay. On a lighter note,
Yeah.
let's go with the bloopers. Now, you said you know you worked many years in the news, so there has to be some good stories, some good
Now,
funny
hey,
stories.
Danny, I never made a mistake. Are you kidding me? There are vaults of videotapes and memory cards filled with my bloopers. I think over, you know, when you spend when you spend as many hours live on camera, you can't help but stumble from here from time to time. But I was trying to think of there, you know, what a funny uh, blooper that I can remember that I can tell you about. Was a number of years ago. I was anchoring the weekend news at WBIR, and Ted Hall was doing sports. Ted had just come on to the Knoxville TV scene, and he was doing sports on weekends at Channel 10. And so I'd known that he and Bob Kessling, who was the sports director at the time, had played in a charity golf tournament that Friday. And so this was the Saturday sports newscast. And so, you know, we're chit chatting before he does his sports. And Ted talks about, he says, "Yeah, Bob." I said, "Well, how did you and Bob do?" And he goes, "Well, we did okay until, you know, Bob took a dump in the creek." I went, "This is live on the air." And I looked at it, it was the way that Bob did what? And Ted got real red faced. He goes, No. He dumped the ball in the creek. And he had... Anyway, those kinds of funny moments. But you're always saying, you know, something silly or. I remember one time I mangled. I tended to mangle names. You know, there was a Joint Chiefs of Staff head at the time was a guy named Vili Kashvili, and the first time I said that name on the air, I read it cold and I just saw the Vili, and I don't know what I actually said, but it probably came out something like Vili, but that, you know, you sort of just go ahead and do that. But yeah, I was trying to think. You know, one of the more embarrassing moments I ever had was the first time I was ever live on TV in a remote situation. Well, actually, I did the weather one time for on a weekend at Channel 10. And they said, Gene, you're funny. You can do this. I thought, yeah, hey, how hard could it be? Well, I get on the air, and this is like say, I've never been live on TV before. And I get up, and this is back in the days of the hard maps. It wasn't even green screen. It was a hard map, right?
Wow.
So I didn't have to worry about the green screens. I had the hard maps there. And and I'm cool, calm, and collected. And the anchor throws to me, Gene, let's tell us about today's weather and what's going to happen in the week. Okay. And as soon as that red light hit me, I don't know, but it was sort of like that moment in broadcast news where Albert Brooks breaks into a sweat. That's what I did. I mean, I broke into this little trickling sweat coming down the side of my face. And you know how when you get that nervous and anxious, I mean, your brain just sort of shuts down. And I get up there and I'm trying to explain the weather, and I get down to this, this thing coming out of the Gulf of, that large body of water there below Florida and Georgia and Louisiana. They call it the Gulf of Mexico. I couldn't think of the word Mexico. I mean, literally, I was going Gulf of, and a studio cameraman screams, Mexico! And if he hadn't done that, I swear I'd probably still be standing there to this day. I couldn't, my brain shut down. The worst part of that whole story, though, is I did survive. And so I called, my family's from Madisonville, so I called home to see what my folks thought about it. My mom, I said, Mom, what'd you think? She goes, well, there's always restaurant management. So even she didn't have a whole lot of high hopes for my broadcast career after that. But the general manager called the news director at the time and said, don't ever let Gene do the weather again. So guess what? 30 years later, I never did the weather again.
That's all. Now, okay, I got to ask you this stupid question. Are you guys fans of the movie Anchorman? Ron Burgundy, the whole.
Yeah, well, yeah, of course. I mean, it's because, sadly, part of it, of course, that's a fictional character that anchored back in the 80s when everything was like it is in that show. But there are certain elements to Anchorman that sort of ring really true.
That's crazy, but that's hilarious.
So, I'm tickled by when they do day 27 when they're at the zoo with I forgot what creature it was that was about to give birth. I could see local TV news doing stuff like that, and I think we did over the years. But obviously it's a real spoof of what folks are like, and I've met anchor men and women who were a lot like Ron Burgundy. Of course, my wife from time to time calls me Ron. Used to a lot more when I was Burgundy.
Yeah, I've always wondered. One thing I've always wondered when I watch you guys on television, I was like, when do they ever sleep? I mean, they're here before I get up. Sometimes they're here before I go to bed. I mean, it's seriously the sleep schedule has to be rough. Has to be.
Well, for a number of years, when you do the primary shows, you're working essentially a second shift. So you come in about 2 and you leave about midnight. And so, but when you're doing the mornings, usually going in about 2 in the morning and then not leave until noon or so. So it's weird times. And I can remember it was really doing I did the morning show at BIR with Robin Wilhoit for 3 or 4 years. It was really hard. It was fun to get up and go to work because all the managers, nobody was there, right?
Oh, yeah.
So you had to run the place.
Yeah.
So you got to do your work for most of the day before all the folks came in. But then, in the afternoons, to handle that schedule, get enough sleep, you got to go to bed, 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night. And in the summer months, it's still daylight, and kids are outdoors running around. So it was really hard, I think, to try to keep your schedule, in line, because it's just those kinds of things are really hard. I remember I had a neighbor one time that had a dog that barked incessantly, and I had to have a hard meeting with them because I said, man, I know it's just 7 in the evening. I'm trying to get some sleep here. Please curb the dog.
How weird is that you're like, well, Gene Paterson, tells me my dog needs to shut up. So got to make the dog shut up.
Yeah, well, and you don't want to be one of those kind of neighbors, right? But I mean, the dog was just anyway. But yeah, and then of course if you're working to be primary, then you're working at night, you're on the other side of town. I rarely, when I first left television and started working a normal schedule, my wife was sort of thrilled about the fact that she got to cook dinner every night and we got to eat dinner at home.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that lasted about 2 weeks. And I called home one day and said, "Hey, Phyllis, what's for dinner?" She goes, "Hey, can you pick up a pizza?" So
Huh.
the newness of eating dinner sort of wore out. But no, it's uh, the television news business can be very glamorous. I mean, you're on TV, people recognize you. You get to be in places that most folks don't. I mean, places I've been as part of that career, I would have never imagined as a kid growing up in Madisonville. But here I've been all over the world covering stories. But there is a price to pay. You work lots of nights, you work long hours, you work weekends, you work holidays. When there's tragedy, you have to, you work. You're in places and asking questions that sometimes are very uncomfortable for the people you're asking questions of, but also for you who are asking those questions. So there is a price, but I think on the whole, if that's the kind of life if you like that kind of excitement, I think it's a great job. It was one of the best jobs I could have ever imagined having for as many years as I did.
Well, let me get you this right here, Gene, because I'm it's gave me my final 9 minutes on the Zoom. It's the free one. So
Okay, okay.
the one thing I really wanted to ask, and I think this is an interesting question. I think most people could ask someone who has a background like you do. What is your opinion and your perspective on the media today and the term fake news that is
Yeah.
being used?
I'll be honest with you. I think I think when you begin to throw fake news at everything that you just disagree with, that becomes sort of dangerous because then, the problem with when you just start describing everything as fake news or things that you believe not to be true as fake news, then they're really what really is news? I mean, what's real news? Is it just news that you agree with? And I think that's the problem with what's happened in this country at the national level. I mean, you've got CNN on one side of the political spectrum theoretically, and then you've got Fox News on the other side theoretically. And really, what you want is just someone or some organization that just tells it straight up. It's difficult, however, when if you're, in the case of CNN, if they're critical of the administration and the answer is not to answer the question, but to just describe the question as, a witch hunt or fake news. I just think that's not healthy for this country. And by the same side, if you're a CNN watcher and you don't watch Fox, and because there clearly are differences in the editorial content. Um, yeah, I just think we're not well rounded. So I fear for our country because I think there is a lot of there's a lot of angst about what is and isn't real. I mean, I watched something a while back where they can, you can Photoshop just about anything into looking and sounding and
Deep
appearing to be
fakes.
real.
Yeah.
Anything. I mean, to the point where you can't tell the difference. And so when we get to the point where stuff is being thrown out there and then described as, and then find out it's fake news, then what do you believe? I mean,
Yeah.
fortunately at the local here at the local level, political ideologies are not as prevalent, at least not in Knoxville. I never felt like we whoever was in office, Democrat and Republican, we covered them just as we normally would with anybody and asked the questions that we felt like viewers wanted to know. But the problem with local news is the margins for TV have gotten so thin. Used to back in the 80s and early 90s, gosh, TV news was a cash cow. So we got to do a lot of stuff. These days, it's not as lucrative. And so what's happened is they've tightened up on budgets and newsrooms. They're smaller, they're younger, they have to do more. I'm amazed at what these young reporters do these days because they do a lot, and they're mostly pretty good at it. But you can't make up with hard work experience, and we don't
Do
have institutional knowledge.
do you think there's an opportunity? Because I don't watch a lot of the news just because of, I know I do most of my, I have to go reading and
Yeah.
hunting for my news because the bias on both sides, it is disgusting. And even whenever they're pushing for the guy I want to win, I feel like, the refs are cheating. Okay, this is cool, but not cool, So the do you think there's an opportunity for a news station to really be down the middle, down the?
No, I think that unfortunately, um, I think these, particularly at the national level, they figured out that there is an audience to be had by being biased, and you know what that means. That means that's money. And so, if you know that if you lean your news editorial decisions toward a certain demographic, you know that you can sell advertising to appeal to that demographic, and those folks will watch you. I think that the lure of cash is just too great, and so and plus, who would be the arbiter? I tend to think the local national, like the traditional ABC, NBC, CBS. I watch them, and I think they're still pretty fair. I don't watch enough CNN or Fox to really pay. I can't tell you how fair they are or not, but I know that one leads one way and one leads the other. I can see that just even peripherally. But the main networks, I think, still do a pretty good job. It's funny. One of President Trump's biggest critics is Jim Acosta over at CNN. I don't know if you remember this, but Jim and I worked together at WBIR back in the 90s.
Really?
And Jim was a good young reporter. And so I think he's still working hard to be a good reporter. But, once you get labeled by the president as on a witch hunt, it's hard to overcome that. But I think he probably carries that with pride. But I just think it's hard. I think it's hard to know. And that's what's sad, what's real out there. So
Gotcha.
you're right. What you do is exactly what you should do. You read, you look, and you try to gain as many different perspectives. And then ultimately, you would hope that facts are facts, and that if there is a fact out there, that you can find it and discern it for its veracity, and then make a decision. But I don't know.
All right, Gene. Well, you know what? This has definitely been fun and very interesting. And I think people are going to enjoy to hear from you. And I just want to say, hey, thank you for coming on the podcast and doing this today.
All right, thank you, Danny. Hey, Leadership Oak Ridge class of 2018,
Best class ever. Yes, sir.
All right, thank you, Danny.
All right, Gene. You have a good one. Well, that wraps up our first episode of the Abracadamn podcast. And that was a lot of fun talking with Gene, getting to know Gene Paterson a little better. And heck, I call it a success. Guys, if you did enjoy this episode, definitely tune into next week's episode because it's going to be a good one also. I want to say thank you to J-Mo Morris, my boy, for helping me with the theme music. And also a big fat thank you to my beautiful, amazing wife for helping me design the Abracadamn podcast logo. Once again, thank you guys for subscribing, following. Be sure to, I'll be on the other platforms as well, Spotify, Amazon Music, iTunes. Just be looking for it. And just hang out and wait till next week's episode. It's going to be a good one. Thanks.
Abracadabra.